everyone. From the campus of Gardner-Webb University, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the third installment in our new town hall series that we're calling Webb Connections. My name is William Downs. I'm president of Gardner-Webb University, and I'm pleased to be moderating tonight's discussion on science and faith. What an incredibly important and timely conversation for us to have here at Gardner-Webb University. At Gardner-Webb, we're fiercely proud of our 116-year history as an institution of Christian higher education. Our faith is a really important part of who we are each and every day. We're also fiercely proud of our people and programs in the sciences. At Gardner-Webb, we offer degree programs and courses in such areas as biology, chemistry, mathematics, geology, physics, computer information systems, instructional technology, and more. As a private Christian liberal arts university, we embrace both conviction and critical thinking. We tend to reject the notion, it's popular in some quarters, that reason and religion are somehow opposing forces. Instead, we see the university as an important meeting space for science and faith to complement each other. But that image of the university as a meeting space for both conviction and critical thinking means that we have to have some vigorous conversations, lots of vigorous conversations. Conversations with our students, with each other, and with those in our community. We want to have one of those vigorous conversations here tonight. We want to unpack the relationship between science and religion just a little bit. It's a relationship that's been examined and debated for centuries, but it remains relevant even here today. And it's certainly relevant at a place like Gardner-Webb. To guide us in our conversation, we're joined by two members of the Gardner-Webb University faculty. First, we have Dr. Jim Mcconnell. Dr. Mcconnell is a native of Indianapolis, Indiana. He joined the Gardner-Webb School of Divinity as a member of the faculty in 2009. He serves as the Associate Dean of the School of Divinity and as Professor of New Testament Interpretation, teaching classes in all areas of New Testament as well as in Biblical Greek. He's the author of numerous articles and essays. Dr. Mcconnell also serves as the associate editor of the journal Review and Expositor. Dr. McConnell began his vocational life as an electrical engineer after earning a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from North Carolina State University. And after 14 years in industry, 4 of which were spent designing dental equipment in Germany, he transitioned into teaching and full-time church ministry, earning a Master of Divinity from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, followed by a PhD in New Testament from Baylor University. Dr. McConnell and his wife, Susan, have 2 married sons and a daughter, as well as twin grandsons. In his free time, Dr. McConnell enjoys gardening, hiking, backpacking, and photography. Next, we have Dr. Meredith Rowe. Dr. Rowe is an assistant professor of biology here at Gardner-Webb. She joined our Department of Natural Sciences in 2016. She teaches human biology, anatomy and physiology, cell biology, and immunology. In 2017, she helped the department create a biomedical sciences concentration for biology majors and also helped pre-medical and dental students organize a pre-health society. Dr. Rowe received her Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Campbell University in Bowie's Creek, North Carolina, and she earned her PhD in Molecular Medicine and Translational Science at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem. Before coming to Gardner-Webb, she was a postdoctoral research associate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her areas of interest are translational science and osteoarthritis. She and her husband, Alex, are the parents of a 2-month-old son. She's, I'm sure, happy to show you pictures at any time during this presentation. So we're very happy to welcome Dr. McConnell and Dr. Rowe here to Webb Connections. And here's our format, folks. We've got a small but hearty student audience here. I'm going to ask a few questions to get our conversation started, and then we're going to open things up to our students here in the audience. And to get things started, first, a broad, generic question. Gardner-Webb University is a national leader in Christian higher education. As members of the faculty here, how do you balance science and faith both inside and outside of the classroom. Dr. McConnell, starting with you.
Well, I'll start with just my personal story outside of the classroom. You've heard Dr. Downs. I have a background in electrical engineering and then moved into biblical studies. As outside the classroom, I embrace a worldview in which God is the creator of all things. The Nicene Creed says God has created all things, whether invisible or visible. And that is the foundation for me. That's the starting point, if you will, in my personal worldview, that God has created all things and that God continues to create. God did not just create everything and then sit back and say, okay, I've wound the watch, now I'm just going to let it run. No, God, I think, is very active in God's creation, continues to be. And so that's what drives my personal worldview. In the classroom, I try and lead our students into that same worldview. Of course, we don't really, in our biblical studies classes, we don't really talk about science per se, but we do have the chance, for example, to investigate the miracles that occur. I'm a New Testament guy, so it's mostly by Jesus, but also by Jesus' followers in the book of Acts. And so we do have a chance to grapple with that. How do we wrap our minds around that? And I'm reminded of what a colleague in my PhD study said. How do you grapple with the miracles? Well, our faith is primarily based on a miracle of a human being being raised from the dead. And Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 15. So again, that reaffirms this worldview that God is active in creation and that God continues to be active in creation and has acted definitively in Jesus Christ in raising him from the dead.
Great, thanks. Dr. Rowe, how do you wrestle with these challenges?
So I was raised in a Christian household. My father was a New Testament professor as well, but my parents also had a great appreciation for science. And so for me, science and religion have never been mutually exclusive fields. They complement each other. And so I have embraced both of them in various ways through my career and through teaching here. Again, I do think it's important for our students, especially to understand that the Bible is not a scientific text and not meant to be interpreted as a scientific text. But they can learn and embrace science through their faith as well. So again, they complement each other. They are not at odds with each other.
Dr. Rowe, as a scientist, why did you make the decision to come to a Christian liberal arts private university?
Well, as you mentioned, I went to Campbell University for undergrad, which is another Christian liberal arts university, and I loved my experience there, the relationships that I was able to develop with my professors and with my classmates as well. Always having that commonality of faith with them was really important to me, and that was something that I wanted to continue in my career and something that I am able to do very well here.
So, Dr. McConnell, you and I share the common experience of going to NC State University as undergraduates, very science-heavy university. Going back a few years and reflecting on your experience, do you recall encountering tensions in the confrontation between science and your own faith?
Certainly, and that was a time in my life that I was frankly struggling with my faith. I was raised in the church. I would consider myself a Baptist now, of course, but I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and I think that was helpful because I think growing up in that environment, we more or less embraced both science and faith, as Meredith has said. And so in my undergraduate years, I was very much searching Probably didn't even know it for some of the time. But what was presented to me at NC State was a purely secular worldview. There was nothing confessional about it. What that led me to do was to separate the two. And now I'm at a place where I can combine the two. So I can't say that at that time it was a huge struggle for me, but that's really more where I was personally than anything else.
Okay. So let's go from this kind of broad autobiographical generic opening question to one a bit more specific. You know, here we are in March of 2021, past the 1-year mark on a global pandemic. How much do we trust God for healing? And how much do we trust medical science? And have you in the past 12, 13 months found yourselves trying to address this theme, again, both inside the classroom with your students, but then outside in your own personal day-to-day lives? What about over there in the natural sciences?
So I think that we're very well able to trust God for healing and to bring us through this rather extended crisis that I think has lasted longer than most of the population would have anticipated anyway, while also embracing what science tells us about the pandemic and about the virus, and things that can be done to prevent the spread of it, and to help our neighbors in doing so. Things like the distancing and masking and staying home and not being out in crowds and such. We're able to follow that scientific evidence in addition to trusting God for healing.
Where do we put our trust?
I literally pray every day that God would remove this pandemic from us. But in doing that, I think one has to rely on the means of removing the pandemic to God. And I too see that God can work through scientists in labs creating vaccines. God can work through vaccine programs to make sure people are getting vaccinated. All this I see as God at work answering the prayer of removing this pandemic. And so again, I see this marriage of faith and science at work in what's going on now. And I think it's unfortunate for my brothers and sisters who would argue that God's going to take care of this outside of anything in the scientific realm. I just think that's a very unfortunate stance.
So, engineer turned New Testament scholar, cell biologist, political scientist. So I think about the last year, 2020, deeply divided political year. In addition to a public health crisis, we had a very polarizing national election. Americans were very divided last year. They remain very divided in 2021. A lot of things are dividing our society, including science and faith. In fact, I think these days, science and faith have become part of the ammunition used in waging political warfare. How do you think, or do you think, we can discover some kind of mutual appreciation of both science and faith and somehow take politics out of this mix that has dominated the national discourse? Who wants to jump on that one?
Well, I tell my students all the time, I have the greatest job in the world because I get paid to be a theorist. And they're the ones that have to go out in the trenches and make it work. So I'm going to speak idealistically and theoretically. It seems to me that science and faith are both seeking the same thing, and that is truth. And that seems to be the common point. If we could simply agree that science and faith are both seeking truth, then I think we'd be a long way towards removing this political agenda from everything that we're doing. Now, again, that's very idealistic. But I think part of the problem comes in, and I'm not the political scientist, but I think human nature says, I want what's best for me. And that's where all these opinions come in. And if we could rally around, well, let's all seek truth, and truth is going to be the best for all of humanity, I think that would go a long way towards taking the political out of it.
Do you feel an undercurrent of politicization in your perception of this relationship between science and faith?
Very much so. I agree with Dr. McConnell in that the commonality between the two is that that search for truth. And I think that a lot could be gained by humanity if we could sit down and have calm discussions with each other, not around politics, because we know that those conversations are not calm, but in being able to discuss with each other and to start with the things that we have in common, and then to be able to have those calm, rational discussions. I think a lot could be gained by that instead of the shouting that tends to happen more in those discussions.
Volume doesn't always mean victory. French biologist and chemist Louis Pasteur. You knew we'd find a way to work Louis Pasteur in here. So Louis Pasteur once said, "A little science distances you from God. A little science distances you from God, but a lot of science brings you nearer to him." With that in mind, what do you think are the things in science that bring you closer to God, Dr. Rowe, and what are the things in faith that bring you closer to science, Dr. McConnell?
So I think a lot of folks would start with creation and looking around them at nature. And that can be an excellent place to start, with science bringing you closer to God. But I think for me, it's at a smaller scale. I'm a cell biologist. So I look in the cell at just the intricacies of it, and so much of it that we can't even understand yet. We are continuing to search for those answers. But I study osteoarthritis, more specifically cell signaling in those cells of the cartilage. And I spent 5.5 years studying those signaling pathways and trying to figure out how proteins can talk to each other, and how that communication changes as osteoarthritis develops. So just at a much smaller scale, to try to understand those intricacies, I find fascinating and amazing. And that scale is also part of the greater creation, and then that is so beautiful in the world.
What are the things in faith that bring you closer to science?
Well, again, I'm a biblical studies person. So when I read the Bible, for example, I hear these ancient people who are grappling with many of the same questions that we have. We have the creation accounts in Genesis. So we have the biblical authors trying to wrap their minds around where did all this come from? Where did evil come from? Why is the world like it is when people are so mean to each other? You hear the Bible grappling with this, certainly not at a scientific level, but a theological level, but they're grappling with the same things. You hear the psalmist in Psalm 19 say that the heavens declare the glory of God. And so those people are just like me. They are looking up at the skies thinking, wow, this is awesome. Where did it come from? And so, thankfully, I live on this side of the Enlightenment, and I have the advantage of all this science and technology that is leading us further and further and further into the intricacies of God's creation. They didn't have that advantage, but they're grappling with the same thing.
You've mentioned and alluded to miracles. Are miracles, as we read them in the Bible, simply metaphors? How do we talk to our friends outside the campus about miracles?
I think the answer to your question, Dr. Downs, is yes and no.
Well played.
Yes, in the fact that I think we have the duty to read behind the miracles to say, what is this miracle account trying to tell me about Jesus or about the early church in Acts, about the prophets? Because the miracles are clearly signifying something. But I don't want to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, because again, this reaffirms my worldview that God is still acting. And frankly, we hear modern miracle accounts. We have accounts that folks just cannot explain using the laws of nature. Dr. West, my colleague, was preaching in chapel this week, and he told of an instance that his daughter experienced. She's a labor and delivery nurse, and she told about a modern miracle. So it's yes and no. I think they can be metaphorical for what they're trying to signify within the biblical text, but I also affirm that those things do actually happen, and our biblical authors are giving us historical accounts of things that they have experienced.
Dr. Rowe, oftentimes evolution is used as a litmus test for those looking at us from the outside. You've mentioned creation. How does a biologist teaching in a university setting wrestle with evolution and the creation story?
That's a great question. And as you mentioned, very much loaded. I think that it is important for us and for our students to understand the scientific fact and what is currently accepted in the scientific community as that that is based in that evidence. And there is very strong scientific evidence for evolution. But at the same time, that does not preclude the existence of God and God's role in that. That he could have created the universe and created the world, and allowing for that very, very elegant mechanism of evolution to bring about change in life and change in the world as well.
Do your students always see it the same way? Have you encountered a variety of responses from students? Have you? Yeah, I mean, we have a diverse mosaic of students who come here. What kinds of responses to that dilemma, that challenge, have you seen in the students in your classroom?
So I haven't gotten much pushback on that personally, because evolution is not at the forefront of most of the classes that I teach. I do discuss it briefly in cell biology and talking about how these cellular mechanisms evolved and developed. But in that class teaching upper level science majors, I haven't gotten much pushback from them, no.
Let's talk about whether or not science allows us to play God. Are there aspects of, let's say, modern medical science that gives humanity the ability to play God? Let's think of an example here of in vitro fertilization. What do you make of the empowering nature of science, and does it allow us to go too far? Start with you, Dr. Mcconnell.
Again, yeah, I think it does give us the opportunity to play God, and usually that phrase is used in a pejorative sense. But I don't think it's necessarily all bad. Genesis 1, humanity was created in the image and likeness of God. And so when we use science to bring things into the way that God intended them to be, then I think we are playing God, but in a very positive sense. We are acting out of that image and likeness in which we were created. Now, the other side of that same coin, however, is the fact that we aren't God. We are fallen representatives of God, and that we can use that ability for purposes that are not godly. And so I think sometimes we can go too far in what we're trying to do.
Dr. Rowe, what do you think? Does science sometimes empower us too much? And are there other examples in which that might be the case?
So one of the lessons that I use in cell biology is the film Gattaca, which takes place in the future, where the genome can be sequenced instantaneously and learn all of the physical characteristics and the potential of that person, intellectual, physical potential of the person. And at this point, we have developed some of that technology. We can sequence the human genome. We can learn certain things from that genome, but we aren't able to, obviously see a person's full intellectual ability from their birth. But around that film, I ask my students two questions: can we and should we? And I think that they're two very important questions. Can we sequence that genome and learn certain things about the person who will be? Yes. Should we learn all of those things and make decisions about which embryo would be chosen and implanted? Usually my students come to the answer of no, because again, they feel like that's taking it too far.
Okay, so we've set the table a little bit. The best part of these Webb Connections conversations relies on the folks on the other side of the cameras here, and that's our Gardner-Webb students. And so at this point, I want to pause and give our students the opportunity to come to a microphone, introduce themselves, and ask the really tough questions of our panelists.
Hey, my name is Thomas Manning, and so I have a question for each of you, kind of regarding the way that you perceive the passage of time in the Bible in regard to, I guess, geological history. Obviously, there's great scientific evidence to state that the Earth is billions of years old. But if you look at the narratives in the Bible, it would suggest, based on those stories, maybe a few thousand years old. So I guess I'm wondering how each of you interpret and kind of reconcile those contrasts there.
I think that's a great question. That's one that lots of folks do struggle with. And there are some who interpret that literally and others who do not. I think that tools that we have, like the fossil record, things like radiocarbon dating, are important scientific tools to have that specific evidence of exactly how old the Earth is, and the fossils of different organisms would be. That it's not necessarily a 24-hour day in that creation story, but more a period of time over which those things would have developed.
Dr. Downs mentioned miracles as metaphor. For me, the creation account in Genesis with the days is metaphorical. Okay. How could we even, well, again, you hear the biblical authors trying to wrap their minds around this creation, and so they come up with this schema to explain it. It's theological. It's not geological. And so the biblical authors are not writing a science textbook. They are writing a theological book. Here's what, well, this is what kind of frustrates me in some of our modern discussions. Folks want to throw all this out and say, but they don't know what they're talking about. The world is really 10,000 years old because I can read the Bible. Well, that same person is going to pick up a cell phone and be able to call somebody in Japan if they want to. Well, how can they do that? It's because of technology and science. So how can you accept that science and then throw everything else out? Like, well, in geology, we're totally stupid, but in everything else, we're really good. That just makes no sense to me. The other argument that's used is, well, God put those fossils there. God put those stars there, millions of light years away. Well, that makes God kind of a deceiver, and that doesn't mesh with my view of God. So, again, I think science is trying to figure out how the Bible says that it happened. God created.
Great question, Thomas. Thanks.
So we deal with a lot of theories and theoretical ideas in the Divinity School, but as Dr. McConnell mentioned, at some point that's going to have to be taken out of the theoretical and thrown into the practical, which, as he mentioned, he leaves that to some of us. But I would like to bring that back to y'all. As someone who does work in the church and isn't always met with an open-minded person who has had a blended idea of faith and science, how would y'all bring up these ideas within a church setting that may not be ready for it, but it's arguably time for them to be ready for it?
Yeah, a great question. what I have found, because, and I say I'm purely a theorist, that's not 100% true, because I spend a lot of my time in church. I'm a member of a church, but I also have the opportunity to be in various churches around the area preaching and teaching, and it's something I love to do. And maybe it's because I'm the guy from Gardner-Webb. That's possible. I'm not the pastor. I'm the guy from Gardner-Webb. You know, I come in, it's in German, you call it the helicopter effect. You come in and you stir up the dust and then you leave. But what I have found is, at least in the congregations I've been a part of, they are very open to a critical reading of Scripture. Now, you have to do it pastorally. You can't go in and say, okay, folks, I'm going to deconstruct everything you've ever learned about the Bible, because it's all garbage. That's not my intent, and it's not even true. But I think if you start to have these conversations in which you read the Bible critically, of course, some people are not going to accept that. We just have to embrace that fact. But I think the majority of people will give you a hearing as you start to read the Bible critically. And I think that helps to open up these avenues of, you know, the Bible is not a science textbook. The Bible's aims are completely different. Now, there is a common point, and that is God. We're describing the same thing, but we're describing it in different terms. You got to know your people. You got to know your congregation, and you got to take baby steps. You cannot just do this from one day to the next. It takes some time. I think the other thing too is you have to build up trust with your people. So you take it slow, but again, you introduce them to a critical reading of Scripture, and some of these differences just kind of go away. This is my experience.
As not a person who's typically viewed as a leader or a clergy in a church, I guess, or never viewed as clergy in a church, our pastor's always reminding us to love God and to love people. And so I think that when those conversations happen with that kindness and, you know, as Dr. Mcconnell mentioned, leading them step by step and not just saying, this is what you have to believe because this is what's accepted as truth, I think could be very helpful.
Okay. So oftentimes the end of times are either talked about as a scientific way of like the sun explodes, burns out, whatever, or religiously Jesus comes back, takes all believers home.
I can start. I think I have a possibly not a very extensive answer to that, in that I don't know which it is. And as difficult as that is for me as a scientist, I like knowing the answer, and I like to have that concrete answer. I think that's one of those things that I don't have an answer for yet, because we don't know which one is, or if it's going to be one or the other.
I think science and the Bible are saying the same thing. One day this is all going to end. The time frame may be a little bit different, but one day it's all going to be over. The sun is going to burn out. Now, this is my understanding. Anytime you talk about eschatology in the Bible, the last things, I think even our biblical authors are seeing through a glass dimly. I think they're giving us their best shot of what's going to happen. And so I find it difficult to set up a timeline or to say, you know, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Is it going to happen? Yes, I truly believe it is in God's good timing. Even Jesus himself said, even the Son of Man doesn't know the day or the hour. So in broad brushstrokes, I think science and at least the Christian faith agree that this is going to end. There is going to be something new. Where they perhaps disagree is like I said, on the time frame. And also maybe how that it actually ends.
Yes, my question kind of relates to the state of the church in the United States and its relationship with science. And, you know, I think if you just like look on the news, you'll notice like some of the mega churches, a lot of those types of pastors seem to be kind of in denial of science in some circumstances. So what do you think that certain members of the Christian faith throughout the United States can do to better represent the scientific community and show that that relationship between science and religion doesn't have to be mutually exclusive?
I think it could help for scientists who are also Christian to be more outspoken about that, instead of sort of hiding it or being less willing to speak out about their faith, because so many of them may want to try to separate those parts of their lives. So I think that them speaking up and saying these two can complement each other and you can embrace both science and faith could be very helpful in that.
Yeah, great question. One thing that we have to keep in mind is, here in North Carolina, we are squarely in the Bible Belt. So we get a view of the church that may not be the same all over the United States, and I'm sure it's not. I would argue there's a very broad spectrum of the relationship between science and faith throughout the United States. In some churches, it's all faith and forget science. Climate change, no way. COVID, God's going to protect me. But the opposite is also true. There are many churches, I'm sure, throughout the United States that totally embrace science and relegate the Bible to, they push it to the side. Miracles, no, we can explain those in some other way. Something else happened. So it seems to me that the middle ground is the right one, in that I think church leaders should lead their congregations to embrace the worldview that is being portrayed in Scripture, and namely that God has created all things and that God is moving history to God's intended aims and purposes. With science, without science, God is going to achieve what God wants. And this is helpful to me because I think science then fits within that worldview. How is God doing this? Well, like I said earlier, it could be that God is using science to move us from this point to this point to this point. So again, the important thing is to embrace that worldview that's being portrayed in Scripture, and do it in a way that's relevant to our 21st century.
So Albert Einstein once said that science without religion is lame and religion without science is blind. Thinking about our students here in the room, thinking about students in your classes, thinking about students who might be watching, what advice do you have for them so that they don't end up lame and blind?
I think it's important to explore both fields and to explore how those fields connect to each other as well, to explore the relationship between the two. And it's through reading and conversation and that personal exploration that's essential, and hopefully something that they are helped with through their coursework here at Gardner-Webb.
You mentioned coursework. Great opportunity. If you know of any courses, I'm a president, I think about the quality of our curriculum. What do we offer to our students if they're hungry to explore this relationship between science and faith?
So there's a course being taught this fall. It's co-taught between the Natural Sciences and Religious Studies departments called Science and Religion, or Issues in Science and Religion, I believe. And I actually checked the system this afternoon. There are plenty of seats left in it, so it's a great chance to wrestle with some of these things in the next semester.
Your advice for staying anything but lame and blind?
Well, again, like Meredith said, I think you embrace both science and faith, and they act as correctives to each other. If God is leading a student to be a scientist, then I say that's what you need to do, but do it within this Christian worldview, that says you are participating with God in bringing the world back to a state of order and peace, because I think that's what God's desire is for all of creation. We do not offer a course in science and faith in the Div School, and that's probably a hole in our curriculum. I would love to develop a course that deals with eco-theology, because the creation care, I think, for me as a hiker and backpacker, as you mentioned, that's something that's very important to me. And again, I think that is an area of science in which we are participating with God. We are being stewards of God's creation. We are preserving God's good creation for the next generation. So that's something we probably need to look at.
Okay, folks, this has been a really good conversation. And in the almost an hour of our conversation, we may not have resolved centuries worth of debate, but we have underscored and brought home this relationship between science and faith right here to our context at Gardner-Webb. And for me, I'm proud to be at a university where we as a people of faith can engage with science in such a constructive fashion and do so in a way that we hope Christianity and science can work together for the betterment of humanity. So my thanks to Dr. Jim Mcconnell and Dr. Meredith Rowe for their expertise and for their insight tonight. My thanks to our students who joined us live and added to our conversation. And finally, I want to thank everybody who has watched and listened online via Facebook and YouTube. We look forward to gathering again with you next month for another installment of Webb Connections. Until then, I'm William Downs, and we're wishing everyone in Bulldog Nation much health, much happiness, and great hope for a better future. Good night.